Hi. Thank you guys for joining us for the program with the Declaration for American Democracy. We have so many great speakers here today. We'll get started once we get everybody in here. Welcome. All right, well, I think we can go ahead and kick it off. Thank you everybody for joining us here today for this important program on HR1, the For the People Act. As we know, it's like monumental democracy reform that we need in Virginia and we're pushing for in Virginia, and that is what brought us here today. We have a large array of speakers coming from so many different issue areas. We have Congressman Gerry Connolly on. We'll also have a representative from Senator Mark Warren's office. We have all of our great Virginia activists today, and I will go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Taylor Edwards. I work with the Declaration for American Democracy. We're a big coalition nationwide, but I specifically am focusing on Virginia activism. But we're a coalition that's focused on democracy reform. So today we're here talking about HR1. Our coalition also works on issues such as HR4, John Lewis Voting Rights Act, as well as HR 51, DC statehood. So we're all about democracy here. And I'm so glad that you guys were able to join us. I'm so glad that we have the wonderful ladies from Network Nova who allowed us to come on here, kind of get this information out to you guys, as it is so important. And I hope you guys love this program, stay on, and then join them, of course, for next week, or this week, sorry, on Friday, their Friday power luncheons. They have Making Good Trouble. It's John Lewis's birthday. They're celebrating. And so that fits perfectly into the program now. And we just hope that you can join us. And thank you, ladies, for having us here today. So first and foremost, we have the wonderful Congressman Gerry Connolly here. Thank you for being here with us today. Congressman Gerald E. Connolly is serving his 7th term in the U.S. House of Representatives from Virginia's 11th District. He serves as the chairman of the Subcommittee on Government Operations and is a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So welcome, Representative Connolly, and he's here to talk to us today about why he supports the For the People Act and what it means to him and for Virginia.
Taylor, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this. And thank you everybody on this Zoom for your commitment to American democracy. Let me set the stage just a little bit. We had a president who actively worked with violent extremist groups to overturn a free and fair, certified, audited, and judicially reviewed election. He and his acolytes attempted in the courts to challenge the results of the election. There were 90 different courts, federal and state, that refused to go along with that in fact found there was no mass fraud. His own Department of Justice belatedly admitted there was no mass fraud that would have made any difference whatsoever in the results. The Electoral College system, including in Republican-controlled states, found there was no mass fraud and certified their own results. Meanwhile, while he absolutely fomented mass resistance to the election results and fed violent armed militia groups who ultimately, in fact, stormed the Capitol in a premeditated attack. And what was the purpose of that? I was on the floor. We were counting and certifying the electoral ballot results, which is normally a ceremonial event. You open an envelope and you say, Alaska casts its 3 electoral votes for Harry Houdini, and you move on to the next state. But not this time. And his Republican allies in the House and Senate challenged Arizona. And we were debating Arizona when the mob interrupted the process with a desire with violence to, in fact, stop it. Now think about that. 7 people died, including 3 police officers. 148 police officers were injured. And American democracy came to the brink. The whole world saw it. And that symbol, the US Capitol, which is not only a symbol of our democracy and freedom, but frankly, it is the symbol for everyone in the world who aspires to it, who admires it, for whom it gives them hope. Those brave young people in Hong Kong look to that Capitol dome. Those hundreds of thousands of people protesting as we speak in cities throughout Myanmar to protest a military coup overturning a free and fair election that Aung San Suu Kyi won, look to our capital. And he was willing to attack and urge his violent extremist supporters to attack that symbol while we were engaged in our constitutional role of certifying an election. That's why the stakes are so important. And it has not ended there. Last year, Republican legislators introduced 35 bills across 15 states to tighten voter restrictions, to purge voting rolls, to make voter ID tougher, to eliminate early voting or make it much more difficult, and certainly to prevent early registration or automatic registration to vote. 35 in 15 states a year ago. Since the beginning of this year, January 1, 106 bills in 28 states have been introduced. Lest you think the attempts to restrict voting have abated. They haven't, they've expanded. And one of the reasons they've expanded is because they didn't like the results. Democrats, President Biden flipped 5 states and he took Georgia. And to make it really special, we took both Georgia's seats subsequently just to show what happened in Georgia was not an anomaly. It was a trend. More people voted. And when more people voted, results changed. So that's why the context in which we're meeting today is so important. HR1 will be a transformative bill. We're going to pass it in the House. But we've got to fight in the Senate. Remember, they still have the filibuster. And we only have 50 Democrats, plus Kamala Harris breaking a tie. HR1 addresses redistricting, ethics, campaign financing. It talks about early registration. It sets a standard for early voting and regular voting, and guarantees people the right to vote, protects those rights, expands those rights. We're headed with this bill in the opposite direction of all those Republicans who've introduced 135 bills to go in the opposite direction. Democracy, we learned on January 6th, is resilient, but it's also fragile. And every generation has to fight for it. This is our fight. This is our fight. We have to empower every American to exercise the most sacred franchise you have as an American, the right to vote, unfettered, uninterfered with, your choice in private. We saw the power during a pandemic of early voting. We had the highest turnout of any American presidential election since 1900. President Trump likes to boast that he got the largest number of votes of any presidential candidate in American history, with one exception, Joe Biden. Joe Biden got 7 million more votes than he got. That's an extraordinary feat. When we expand the franchise, more people vote, more people participate, and our democracy is strengthened. What a difference an election makes. To go from Donald Trump to Joe Biden is not an incremental change. Passing HR1 doesn't necessarily guarantee one party or the other is going to win elections, but it does guarantee that no party ever again is going to have the power to actually threaten free and fair election results. Our democracy is absolutely predicated on the ability of people to vote and that vote to be respected by all parties concerned. HR1 will create the architecture to strengthen that resolve, to strengthen that commitment, and to strengthen the results that voters cast. It is critical for our democracy. I cannot think of a more important subject for us to talk about today. Maybe racial justice. That's equally important. And we can, and by the way, that's not unrelated to what we're talking about here, because what they're going after, the votes they're trying to suppress, are in communities of color. So the work we're about today could not be more important. And I want you to know, I got into politics because I was a kid in high school and college who grew up in the civil rights movement. You know, Martin Luther King was not in the history books for me. He was a real person in my lifetime. And I was very inspired by what the civil rights movement represented. And I was also very inspired by the anti-Vietnam War movement, and I'm still proud of both. And those two things really inspired me to get into public life. For me, this is a passion, protecting everybody's right to vote. People died for it. People died just a few weeks ago in the US Capitol for it. So what you're about today is of the highest order of magnitude in importance to the future of American democracy and constitutional government. I'm willing to spend the rest of my life fighting for it. I hope you are too. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Representative Connolly. I definitely agree with you. We're here to fight. Virginia, we're here to fight for this bill. We're here to fight for democracy. And as Representative Connolly did mention, this bill definitely touches on a lot of different issue areas. It is important for everybody, no matter what your issue is or what you are passionate about. It definitely affects everybody. So thank you so much, Representative Connolly, for your words. I hope you stay on. We are going to—
I can stay on for a while.
Sounds good. We're going to, I see there's some questions popping up in the chat. We're going to hold our Q&A section for the end. So put them in the chat. We'll make sure to call on you. We'll make sure to have your questions answered.
Taylor, and can I just say, we're having a Democratic caucus conference call starting at 1 o'clock to go over the COVID relief bill.
Okay.
The 1.9 trillion, and that's going to take me through the end of the afternoon. So if you have questions for me, Taylor, if I could count on you to forward them to me, and we will get back to you by email.
Okay, we can do that. All righty, but still put your questions in the chat and we'll make sure to give them to the congressman, and we'll make sure that he can get you guys some answers. So thank you so much. We're going to move on to our next speaker. We have the lovely Matt Royer on with us today. Matt Royer is a progressive Democratic activist hailing from his home state of Virginia. He is dedicated to moving our Commonwealth further by championing a Green New Deal, raising the voices of our working class, helping organize our workers and their unions, and helping build a government that represents the people and not for-profit corporations. Matt Royer is the co-chair of the Virginia Justice Democrats, the president of the Arlington Young Democrats, the campaign director of the Virginia Young Democrats, the resolutions chair of the 8th Congressional District Democratic Committee, and the labor organizing lead for the Green New Deal Virginia Coalition. Thank you, Matt, for being here, and thank you for, supporting HR1 and being a supporter.
Thank you so much, Taylor. Our country, our democracy, were founded on the principles that the government and laws should be dictated by and for the people. And as the centuries have gone by, we have realized how untrue that has been. Because for the past several decades, the curtain has been drawn back to show that there is a cancer that has been spreading within the United States from the top down. The influence of big corporations and the ultra wealthy have created a system in which the vast majority of everyday Americans are suffering. And it began well before the Citizens United decision in 2009. It began when officials kept making it more and more difficult for certain types of people to get to the ballot box, despite saying that everyone deserves the right to vote, calling for arbitrary identification laws and waiting times that go on for hours until this day. It began with redlining, which fed into gerrymandering, creating a small number of representatives in our legislative branch that stood for the working class. It started with Reaganomics that stated that giving more to the top 1% of people will ultimately mean more money for the 99%. But what we have found was that it only furthered the wealth gap between those who had power and money and those who didn't. Then, after a couple decades of both Democrats and Republicans going along with this way of thinking, we found ourselves at the Citizens United decision, which was caused by the ultra wealthy continually wielding their influence to gain more influence and power. But the thing is about the working class movement is that we are resilient. And in the face of all this adversity, we still found a way to gain our footing and come back into Congress and introduce HR1, the For the People Act. What I have to tell you today is that this is not a left or right issue. This is a bottom-up issue. Those who have the money and power want to remain wealthy and in power, and they know that by giving more of a voice to the people, the common person, they know that this is a threat to the ways we have worked. But as we all know too well, things have not been and are not working right now. Money is truly the root of all evil. Because the influence of money has allowed the rich to get richer and to bar the working class from getting the fair representation that they need. Financial issues are the #1 reason why qualified people do not run for office, but we have an opportunity to help that now. We must demand a seat at that table if we want our issues to be heard, and if we can't have a seat at it, we have to overturn that same table and build it back up in a way that is representative of our morals and values. The people want a government that represents the wants and needs of the many, not just the few. And in order to accomplish this, we must put in long-lasting, true, democratic, and ethical reforms that ensure free and fair elections that will elect diverse legislators who will truly represent the districts that they come from. We cannot continue to let corporate money overflow the coffers of elected officials who do not work in the interest of the public. We cannot continue to let our legislators choose their voters instead of the voters choosing their elected officials. We cannot continue to allow the revolving door between Capitol Hill and lobbying firms to remain open. That is why I'm joining Congressman Connolly and my fellow activists here today to demand that our Democratic representatives in the House and Senate support HR1. This bill has been sitting on the table of the now minority leader, Mitch McConnell, for 2 years. But thanks to the hard work of many of us here and elsewhere, and to the talented organizers, particularly in Georgia, we have the opportunity to pass this law. We are not presented with opportunities like this often. So my plea to the House and the Senate is this: what side do you want to be on at the end of the day? Do you want to look back on your career knowing you did everything you could possibly to fairly represent Americans? Or are you comfortable watching the working class and marginalized communities continue to be decimated under the thumb of those with money and influence? Again, I ask all of you here to get on the phone, on your email, on your social media, however you want to do that, and contact your Congress people and senators to pass HR1. What a better place than here. What a better time than now. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, so much. Yes, there are definitely ways to get in contact with your Congress members. As you guys know, our House of Representatives are representatives from Virginia. All of them have signed on except for 4. That's 4. That's a lot of people. So get on the phone, make sure you're emailing, getting in contact with them via social media. They need to hear your voice, and they need to hear that HR1, the For the People Act, is what the people of Virginia are wanting and needing to strengthen our democracy and to ensure that our democracy not only works for the rich, but it works for everybody. No matter who you are, our democracy can work. Like Matt said, this is not a partisan bill. This is a bipartisan bill for the people. This is for voting rights. This is for, like I said, no matter what issue you're focused on, no matter what you have passions about, this bill definitely speaks to you. So make sure you get your congresspeople involved. If you have any questions, remember to put them in the chat and we will answer them at the end. Thank you all for being here. And we are going to thank you, Matt, for your words of wisdom, always so wise. So now we will move on to Krysta Nicole Jones. Krysta Jones has committed her life to public service and developing leaders and is passionate about the power of politics to change lives. In 2021, she was named one of the Library of Virginia Dominion Energy's Strong Men and Women in Virginia History for her important community contributions. In 2006, Krysta founded Vote Lead Impact to educate Black leaders about the political process and has served as Director of Outreach for 2 members of Congress. Krysta has held leadership roles for several local, state, and national organizations and is currently the president of the National Women's Political Caucus, Virginia. Krysta has played a pivotal role in Virginia politics, managing several campaigns and serving on the steering committee for the Women's Summit, which mobilized 1,000 attendees to help regain Democratic control of the Virginia General Assembly in 2019. Krysta hosts her own show, A Seat at the Table, on Arlington Independent Media, produces and hosts a radio show for the League of Women Voters of Arlington, and writes a column for ARLnow.com. She is a graduate of the George Washington University Graduate School of Political Management, the Sorensen Institute of Political Leadership, and the Women's Campaign School at Yale. Thank you, Krysta, for joining us today and sharing your words and support for HR1.
Thank you so much, Taylor. We say we the people of the United States, but in reality, in 1526, enslaved Africans were part of a Spanish expedition to establish an outpost on the North American coast in present-day South Carolina. Since then, African Americans and other people of color have literally built this nation, and we should be included in that but we've been subjugated and enslaved and suppressed with no voice. We say, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, but in reality, we have died for this nation and been beaten and killed with no voice. We say, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. But in reality, we have been bought and sold, our families have been ripped apart, and we still don't have true justice or equality. We say, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. But in reality, when the Constitution was written, our nation was being designed to create a power structure which kept Blacks and people of color at the bottom. I want you to stop and think for a moment about the psychological and generational trauma of being bought, sold, and killed with no voice or no vote. Without the right to vote, Frederick Douglass correctly predicted, Blacks would be subjected to continued discrimination and would never be truly free or equal. Douglass understood that especially in the South, whites with fresh memories of the cruelties of war would seek vengeance on Blacks. Of course, we have made some progress. In 1965, with the Voting Rights Act, we were able to wrangle some of that power, and African Americans and people of color could vote with less suppression. Dr. Naeem Akbar, a clinical psychologist, has made the case for the correlation between the slavery experience and the current state of mind of contemporary African Americans. Coupled with voter suppression, this can have critical impacts on self-worth and inclusion. The decisions made at the founding of this nation were detrimental and lasting. We must repair the mistakes of the past. In 2018, Pew Research Center did a survey which said that 74% of respondents ranked election participation as a very important determinant of good citizenship. Voting gives us a voice, and HR1 is our microphone. In this fragile moment for our country, facing the pandemic, the economic crisis, and the national reckoning over systemic racism, HR1 is more relevant than ever. We all know the stats. People of color are more disproportionately affected by COVID, by chronic diseases, by less access to quality education, by fluctuations in the economy. HR1 will provide the access to the ballot needed to ensure that all people have equal, fair, and just representation. For example, implementing automatic voter restoration in all 50 states and the District of Columbia could result in more than 22 million newly registered voters in just the first year of implementation. Ending partisan gerrymandering could also allow more people of color to have an opportunity to be elected and to have a voice. HR1 will help us turn the corner on our journey to form a more perfect union, continue us down the right path to equality, and line up with what we say and with reality. We will cash in that rain check after centuries of literally being the currency. HR1, support it and give us all a voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Krysta. Thank you for those words about how HR1 is definitely a stepping stone for, fighting racial inequality, fighting how we are turned away from the ballot year after year, time after time, simply for no reason. So please urge your members of Congress, as well as show your support for Congress to support this bill, because HR1, the For the People Act, not only has to deal with, democracy reform for a group of people or a subgroup of people, is democracy reform for everybody. Democracy reform for people who have in the past been treated less than human, less than Americans. This democracy needs to be strengthened. It needs to be made more perfect because it is not right now. And thank you, Krysta, for shining a light on the history and shining a light on how we can make steps to improve our democracy.
Taylor, could I just interject, Congress? This is Gerry Connolly again.
Yes, of course, of course.
So just to add to Krysta's history and what Matt had to say, remember, when you're talking to people about this, including members of Congress, this isn't just about our history we got to fix. This is about an imminent threat today to the ability of people to vote and to abide by the results of elections. It's only a month ago they stormed the Capitol and 7 people died. And as I said, there are now 138 pieces of legislation in 28 states to roll back the rights of people to vote, the rights of people to stay on the voting rolls, the rights of people to register automatically or vote early. This is under assault right now. And if we don't act, some of those pieces of legislation are going to prevail. And so it's critical that we act and act fast. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry at all. This is definitely a threat nationwide. And as you said, we need to create some urgency. We need to act fast. And we need to urge those members of Congress who have not yet supported the bill to support the bill, because it is, as Representative Connolly said, an imminent threat today, right now. So thank you. Don't ever apologize for those words. Thank you, Krysta. Thank you for joining us. Of course, again, I'm just going to remind everybody, we'll have our Q&A at the end. So just add your questions to the chat and we'll make sure to get to you. Next, we will have on Ryan Adams. Ryan Adams was born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee, and educated at Tennessee Technical University, where he graduated with a bachelor's in political science, minoring in history and Asian studies. Throughout his career, he worked with the advocacy and environmental sectors. Currently, he is the regional field director of the League of Conservation Voters, the Climate Action Program, where he works to advance environmental policy and legislation here in Virginia, especially Hampton Roads. One of the things he enjoys about the region is exploring the outdoors and connecting with other environmental activists. He's the chair of the Hampton Clean City Commission. He's been involved with the commission for a little over 3.5 years, first as a volunteer, and now he's a member of the board and various committees. He keeps active in the community and particularly in the environmental policy area. So thank you so much, Ryan, for being with us here today and to talking to us about how the For the People Act directly relates to environmental policy and climate action.
Yeah, for sure. And, thanks for the kind words, Taylor, definitely appreciate it. I know the team in DC and also here in Virginia was really excited about this event. So, great to hear from the representative and also, the previous panelists. But for us, HR1 is really important. Just a few things I heard, mentioned before I got a chance to speak was just how, our issues are interconnected, as far as environmental issues, We're constantly working on the ground, just with regular people. So, as far as our work, in the environmental sector, we think that, we have some of the best stories that you can get on the ground just from people. So we're not just talking about, clean air or clean water, or right now we're currently working on clean car standards here in Virginia. That also goes into other issues like voting rights, disenfranchisement, money in politics, corruption, accountability. You all mentioned the revolving door in DC, with lobbyists. All these things are important. And, just based on my experience, here on the ground in Hampton Roads, when we talk to people about the environment, they typically talk about other issues. In particular, when we, have our Green Roots campaign during the election season, we switch over and we start to support candidates that support our policies during the year. And typically, if you're knocking on the door and talking to somebody, they know who LCV is. They know the different issues that we're working on as far as the environment, but they're also going to talk to you about more localized issues. So, things, for example, I wrote down a few, pretty regional examples down here, but, flooding in Norfolk is a pretty big issue. In Hampton, saving oysters is a big issue. Pipelines in Chesapeake is a really big issue. Solar access right now in public schools in Newport News is a real local issue at a city council level. So, I just talked about those, just to show you a few issues in just 4 cities in the whole entire state that, might not be talked about, too much, but it's all interconnected, in terms of HR1 and just giving people an opportunity to vote. Because, if everybody doesn't have the opportunity to vote, solar panels in Newport News schools, that's just an issue that a few people are talking about or voting on. Everybody won't have the opportunity to go vote, at the city level, at the state level, or at the federal level. So, HR1 is really important. And, racial justice and equity work, those are just, 2 issues that we've really been focusing on the past couple of years. And me, being on the ground and just seeing this work, being done, they're really important. And HR1 directly ties into that. That's a racial justice issue. And it's something that we, I would say pride ourselves on our work, here in the region. We've had a pretty diverse array of staff members, interns, and it spans beyond our region, also throughout our whole program, in the country. So, everybody's concerned about that. And, like I said, in terms of just relevant stories, I think that's a big thing, because anybody that's worked in campaigns, Matt, Krysta, anybody, stories, that's the main thing. If you can find stories that are unique, on the ground stories that are impacting regular people, it's really important, and you can really emphasize what you're working on and show why it's important. So that's just one way I think, HR1 is really relevant. Also important, all those issues I just talked about, and just fixing democracy. And, for us, pretty much every single day of the week, our members, our volunteers, our staff are making calls to our local representatives, also our senators, just getting them on board with different issues. On the laundry list of issues that we're currently working on, HR1, I would say, would be just about at the top of the list. So, I highly encourage you, after this event, to contact your representatives. If you don't talk to somebody directly, leave a message, right on their wall on Facebook. I mean, there's so many different ways you can get in contact with people nowadays, and just make that a priority.
Thank you, Ryan. I definitely agree. As Ryan said, reaching out to your members of Congress, setting up virtual in-district meetings is a way that you can talk to them. So like how we're on Zoom right now, you can set up a Zoom call with your representatives, and you can talk about the For the People Act. You can talk about the issues and how it relates to you. What is your story? They always want to hear about your story. And so I do recommend reaching out to your Congress members. If it's a phone call, like you said, leave a message. message. And if you talk to some of their staff, always tell them how you feel about the For the People Act and express it to them. It's not the congressman, but at the same time, they work directly for him, and their job is to get your issues and what you are interested in back to them. So don't shy away if it's not the congressperson. Send emails, and like you said, write on their Facebook walls, tweet them at their accounts, because they see this. And when they see this, they have to know that this is something that Virginians want. So thank you, Ryan, for giving those calls to action and to showing how, environment and HR1 are related, and how your work at LCV, League of Conservation Voters, is definitely working on HR1, and that's one of y'all's top priorities as well. So thank you. Next, we will have the lovely Nancy Morgan. Nancy Morgan is the coordinator of the Virginia chapter of American Promise, working on getting big money out of politics. Her background, 20 years as an economist, working for the United Nations on governance and food security issues. 10 years with the USDA working on policy, and 7 years in the US Peace Corps in Africa. As promoted good commitment to good governance and getting money out of politics. As a volunteer advocate, she is working on passing a U.S. constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, enacting campaign finance at the federal level, and getting Virginia, one of the only 5 states with no limitations on campaign finance, to finally enact campaign finance legislation. So welcome, Nancy, and thank you for being here and supporting the For the People Act.
Thank you, Taylor. And again, I'm with the Virginia chapter of American Promise. And as Taylor said, we're working to get a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. We think that HR1 is an important democracy bill, especially related to the campaign finance provisions. And in additional, as Taylor said, we have to work in Virginia because we know that Virginia is a pay-to-play state. And as mentioned, we're only one of 5 states that has no limitations. Our challenge is that campaign finance isn't a very sexy topic, but when you go to the American people, it's rather remarkable in this partisan times. 80% of Americans, including 87% of business owners, agree that our campaign finance system is broken. When you ask them what they care about, it's whether climate change, dysfunctional health system, spiraling cost of prescription drugs, the other issues mentioned today, poverty, criminal and racial justice, all the issues, as Matt mentioned, the list goes on. And the reason why our public policies don't respond to the will of the American people is due to the corrosive impact of money in our elections. And certainly Representative Connolly and others would agree that they don't want to spend 30 to 70% of their time dialing for dollars. So that's why the provisions of this bill, HR1, are so important. The bill addresses disclosure rules, basically introducing the sunshine factor, revealing sources of dark money, establishing a system of public funding for elections. And I think probably one of the most important issues is restructuring the Federal Elections Committee that has basically been in rigor mortis for the last 5-10 years. The bill is also important because of the ethics issues on transparency and accountability. And those of you in Virginia, we have our own problems here in Virginia. According to the recently released Swamp Index, Virginia rated 46 out of 50 states in terms of ethical standards. Is this bill the panacea to get money out of politics? It's a step in the right direction, but when you look at the erosion of our rights as citizens and the stifling of our voices because of money, this steady drip erosion of our voices goes back to a whole history of Supreme Court rulings going back to the 1970s, and particularly Buckley versus Vallejo that basically ruled that you can't ban election spending. And finally, obviously, it culminated in Citizens United. Everybody knows in 2010 how that released a flood of money into our politics. So if we really want to regain control of campaign finance system, we need to look at this constitutional amendment. HR1 is an important roadmap for democracy and campaign finance. And there's a bill, HJR1, that was introduced by Ted Deutsch. This was signed off by all 7 of our Democratic legislators and the 2 senators last year. And we're hoping that we're going to go ahead and get everybody signed up. The challenge obviously on campaign finance, on constitutional amendments is getting bipartisan support. But actually looking at the $14 billion spent in our last election, I think the opportunity is here, given that Republicans recognize that the money from the left is currently swamping their fundraising efforts. So I think this is a great time for democracy reform, HR1, the constitutional amendment. We think it's an exciting time, and we call on the 4 Democratic senators who haven't signed on HR1 to do so, and also to sign on HJR1, the Deutsch bill. So, and it just in sort of a headline, if you're interested in joining us as we do advocacy on money and politics, I'll put my name, email in the chat box, and certainly you can check out our website, which is virginiamoneyoutofpolitics.org. So thanks so much, Taylor.
Of course. Thank you, Nancy, for being with us and speaking with us about how, money has unfortunately, taken role of our voting and of our elections, and how, we've got to start restoring the power back to the people and take it out of big money, take it out of big corporations, and definitely get the voices of the people out and make sure that we're represented. So thank you so much, Nancy. As she said, she has some efforts going on as well. And you can definitely, join their moves to get money out of politics in Virginia. I will like to say that just to reiterate that we do have some members of Congress that have signed on in Virginia, but we still have 4 representatives from Virginia who have not signed on. And so we just urge you today to reach out to them and to make sure that they know that you support the bill. So thank you so much, Nancy, and thanks for those calls of action as far as money, getting money out of politics and HR1. Our next speaker is going to be Bo Matteo. He is the Northern Virginia Regional Director for U.S. Senator Mark Warner. He covers a wide range of issues for the senator, focusing at the intersection of public engagement and policy, ensuring that stakeholders across the Commonwealth are heard throughout the legislative process. So thank you so much, Bo, for being here and for giving us some insight as far as the actions in the Senate around the For the People Act.
Thanks, Taylor, and thanks so much for everybody from Krysta, Matt, Nancy, Ryan, and the congressman also for talking about the importance of the For the People Act. Senator Warner is also a proud sponsor of the For the People Act, which, as folks have said, would help get money out of politics, increase transparency around political donors, and really crack down on lobbying and expand voting rights. Specifically on voting rights, the senator is proud that the bill would create an automatic voter registration system, require presidential and vice presidential candidates to release 10 years of tax returns, make election day a federal holiday for federal employees, and prohibit voter roll purging. On the topics of campaign finance reform, the bill would include the Disclose Act, which would require super PACs and dark money political organizations to make their donors public. It also specifically includes Senator Warner's Honest Ads Act. As you remember, the House version included concerning changes from the SHIELD Act version without input or consent. Senator Warner's staff, including myself, worked hard to ensure that the Senate version reflects only technical changes from last Congress. And it also seeks to end partisan gerrymandering by requiring states to use independent state commissions rather than legislators to draw districts. On the topics of the ethics, from the bill, it requires the president and vice president to disclose again 10 years of tax returns that candidates must do the same. It also includes Senator Warner's FIRE Act, which would require federal candidates to report foreign contacts to the FBI. Last year, the House passed the For the People Act, but unfortunately, Mitch McConnell wouldn't allow the Senate to vote for it. So we're working hard to ensure that the Senate does see further movement and pass this bill during this congressional session. And so I want to thank you again. I work up here in Northern Virginia. And so if I think I saw a little bit on the chat box for folks wondering how to reach out to Senator Warner, please feel free to always reach out to me, I can put my email on the chat box, and looking forward to the question and answers and any way that I can be helpful.
Thank you so much, Bo. As he said, again, definitely reach out to him to see if any questions or any things that you want to talk to Senator Warner about, sorry. And we will start the Q&A section right now. So if you have any questions, make sure to drop them in the chat box. As for our speakers, feel free to jump in if you feel that you have an answer to this question, and we will go ahead and get started. So as far as, there's a question from Ryan Warner from Chesapeake, Virginia. He asks, how can this bill be passed if we can only pass bills using the budget reconciliation clause? I can say, I can jump in here and say, at least the Declaration for American Democracy has a Hill working group, and we've heard from Speaker Pelosi and Leader Schumer to pass the For the People Act. We just want to let you guys know that there are other mechanisms to passing the bills beyond budget reconciliation, for example, with Republican support, but there is also much consideration happening regarding, filibuster reform, and those conversations need to be played out within the Senate Democratic Caucus before we really have a clear path and know exactly what path this bill is going to take. So regardless, definitely reach out to your members of Congress in the House and the Senate and make sure that we can get them on board, whether they're Democrat or Republican, because as Matt Royer mentioned earlier, this is not a partisan bill. This is definitely a bipartisan bill. We have a question. It says, let's see. This is for Bo. Jane Green from Arlington asked, will our senators support ending the filibuster if necessary to pass the For the People Act?
Hey, this is Bo. So I think that the senator is definitely, we've definitely been taking a lot of meetings and from different constituents regarding the filibuster request. Senator Warner does have a bill that would require, if legislation has the majority of senators for that bill to be voted for on the floor. If there are specific concerns or a group of folks who would definitely support the filibuster and removing it, please feel free to reach out to me and we can talk more about this offline.
Thank you. We have a question here from, let's see, Kristen Cabral. She asked, does HR1 have strong election security provisions? This could hook and get Representative Spanberger on the bill. Anybody want to jump in there? I know personally that the bill definitely, one of the changes that in 2021 that was made on the bill is definitely an anti-foreign interference upgrades. So it incorporates best practices and lessons learned from the recent experiences preventing foreign interference in the 2020 election. Just keep in mind as well, the House of Representatives approved similar provisions as part of the SHIELD Act in the 116th Congress, and it was added on the For the People Act. Okay, there's one more, there's another question coming in, and it says, have these representatives that haven't signed on, that's Representatives Spanberger, McEachin, Luria, and Wexton, expressed why they don't support the bill? I know that some of our teams have been reaching out to their offices. I know some people were talking about it in the chat as well. These representatives have not publicly spoken out about the bill, but we definitely need them to get on board. We definitely need them to, publicly be in support of the For the People Act. And one way to do that is to definitely, call your members of Congress, tweet them, email them, set up those in-district meetings. So like I said, like we're here on Zoom, you can also set one of those up with your members of Congress and explain why you support the For the People Act. And that is definitely a way to kind of edge them to publicly speak out about it, as if Virginians are interested in the bill and if they do support the bill, they should and support the bill too. Let's see, we have one question from Facebook asking, how does this bill relate to the John Lewis Voting Rights Act or HR4? Anybody want to jump in there? Yeah, well, I can say, Matt, you want to go ahead?
I was just going to say that I know that the John Lewis Act has a lot to do with the specific protections for minorities and for people of color and other marginalized groups from getting to the ballot box and having them make it more accessible. This obviously is a much broader reaching bill, since it has a lot to do with not just the access to the ballot box, but also the campaigning and also the other election protections that are around that. So I would say that HR4 is a subset of HR1, where HR1 is the much more broad-reaching piece of legislation.
Right. I agree. Let's see, we have one last question coming in from Karen Kennard from Alexandria, Virginia. She says, what modifications have been made to the version of the House bill passed in the last Congress? And I can take this one. So like I mentioned, anti-foreign interference upgrades have definitely been put in there. We also have a pandemic voting upgrade. So as we weren't anticipating the pandemic, they have put in additional provisions. It incorporates, best practices and lessons learned from recent experiences promoting safe and accessible voting in 2020 election. And these bills were passed, some of these provisions were even passed in the HEROES Act, in the updated HEROES Act in the 116th Congress. So that's one of the provisions. And then there's constitutional girding as well. So these protections will be able to, prevent future constitutional questions or challenges by clarifying and expanding findings language, including, venue requirements and amending existing languages. So those constitutional protections are just there to make sure that this bill can be permanent, and then no constitutional, challenges can be made to overturn the For the People Act and all this, democracy reform and voting reform that we'll have there as well. Let's see, I think we have another question for Bo. It says, how does having, from Erica Jackson, it says, how does having another piece of legislation to quasi allow for majoritarian rule, but without the actual power of eliminating the filibuster, help get us closer to the Senate version of HR1 being passed?
So the idea would be behind, if there are a lot of times there are pieces of legislation that are co-sponsored by the majority of members in Congress, yet fail to reach the Senate floor or the House floor. And so this piece of legislation, this piece of legislation would ensure that the vote would at least happen. And oftentimes you don't even see a vote happening on the floor due to the filibuster. So, that would be one avenue of doing so. I'm happy to kind of continue to talk to folks to see what avenues they believe the best way to go about ensuring that critical legislation, just like We the People Act, is brought and voted to on the floor, and also around a slew of other issues that Ryan mentioned, that Matt mentioned as well, that are very important to making sure that we're working for folks across the Commonwealth and across the country as well. So feel free to make sure to reach out. I know it's one avenue that we have supported and gotten some bipartisan stuff. So just wanted to point that out and flag that for folks.
Thank you so much, Bo. And then our last question is, what is the status of HR1 in the current House session? So right now, we're anticipating that the bill will be brought to a vote very soon. So that is just more, urgency to reach out to your members of Congress who haven't signed on yet. Thank those members of Congress that have signed on, and make sure that your voice is heard and that you definitely share with them your story and why HR1 is important to you and why HR1 is important to Virginia. So I just want to thank everybody for your amazing questions, and thank you for our panel for answering those questions. We are definitely excited about HR1 and think that everybody should get involved. And so we do have some calls to action for you guys today. Like I mentioned before, you can set up an in-district meeting with your member of Congress. This can be a Zoom call. You don't have to do it alone. You can do it with a group of people, and basically just tell your member of Congress why you support the For the People Act and why HR1 is important for Virginia. There's a call and email action that you can take. Call your members of Congress, email your member of Congress. Our coalition, the Declaration for American Democracy, has a write a letter to the editor tool that you can use. If you go to dfadcoalition.org/LTE, it's a simple, easy tool. It lets you put in your information. It lets you put in why you support the For the People Act, and then it directly sends it to your local media, and definitely is a fast and easy tool to write a letter to the editor. You can tweet your member of Congress. You can write on their Facebook walls. I think someone mentioned that earlier. And then we will also add some links. Someone asked, I think I saw a question. Someone asked how can we, reach out to people who haven't signed on? How can we get other people involved? We have joined with Common Cause, and we have a phone bank every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. And we'll put the links in the chat there. You can register for that. So once again, I just want to thank all of our speakers here today. Thank you for supporting the For the People Act. Thank you for everybody attending this virtual rally. And thank you for the team at Network Nova for giving us this platform and giving us these this lovely audience to speak to today. And please join them this Friday for their power luncheon to speak about John Lewis's birthday and getting into good trouble. So thank you guys, and reach out to your members of Congress and make sure to take action around the For the People Act.
Thank you, Taylor.
Of course.
Thanks, Taylor.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us.